Next, please welcome to the stage Galen Nelson of Mass CEC.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, everybody. Panelists, why don't you join me up here on stage? So again, I'm Galen Nelson. I'm the Chief Climate Officer at the Mass Clean Energy Center, and really happy to be joined by this panel today. So again, really happy to be joined by Jane Chen, the co-founder and CEO of Stepwise, Jit Ki Chen, the CTO at Suffolk Innovation, Joanna Hilvert, VP of Integration, Environmental and Sustainability at Biomed Realty, and Steele DeVito, founder and CEO of the Steele Group. So I'm really excited for this conversation today. You all bring different perspectives to this sector, the building sector, which is critical to meeting our decarbonization goals here in Massachusetts and globally. The sector comprises roughly 35% of emissions here in Massachusetts, with building heating contributing the most to that total. And I've been working in this space for a really long time. I happen to think at both the municipal and state levels, and I happen to think that this is the most difficult challenge that we face as far as our need to decarbonize and electrify our entire economy, particularly with regard to existing buildings. So really, really tough challenge, and now with a new, very rapidly changing federal landscape. So let's actually start by addressing the elephant in the room. The federal landscape has shifted. Obviously, it's no doubt more hostile to climate progress. For example, I can tell you that we're already seeing dramatic reductions in grants to early stage companies here in Massachusetts working across all sectors, including the high performance building realm. Of course, that's very upsetting. And we're also seeing, of course, a turbulent macroeconomic landscape with regard to uncertainty around tariffs. At the same time, as many of you are aware, a good deal of building and energy regulatory landscape is held and controlled at the state level. And as we've heard again today, we're really blessed with a very solid climate tech innovation ecosystem here in Massachusetts. So, Joanna, perhaps we could start with you. If you could just take a moment and share some observations about this economic climate and perhaps how you, your firm, are adjusting to it, and perhaps what steps the Commonwealth could be taking in addition to the steps that have already been laid out today by the governor and others to ensure that we continue to make progress on our building decarbonization goals.
Sure. Thanks, Galen, and thanks for having me here today. Just a little bit of background first on my company. I'm with Biomed Realty, which is a life sciences real estate owner. So I come from the perspective of the building owner and operator. We are also a developer. So I'm not going to lie, it is a super challenging landscape right now, and it has been before January. So already we were sort of facing a challenging macroeconomic environment, and while at the same time facing pretty forward-looking and aggressive requirements for decarbonization from our local communities. That was a challenge in and of itself. And then with the new administration and sort of the opposite pressure, so we're getting the pressure locally to reduce our emphasis on fossil fuels, and now the federal pressure to do the opposite. But what I can say is that with challenge comes opportunity, and I think it's an opportunity to distinguish yourself in this market. We have done that by aligning our sustainability goals with our business strategy. And I think one of the ways that we can do that, coming from the life sciences market, we've heard a lot about innovation today. Innovation is super important to our tenants, obviously, and we create the spaces in which they innovate. So your environment can either inhibit innovation or it can accelerate innovation. Obviously, we want to accelerate it, and I think sustainability plays a really big role in that. So we're fortunate that sustainability is important to our clients. And so we look to partner not only with our tenants, but with our local communities to achieve those goals. And that's really our strategy, not whatever the current trend is. Just a quick example, we're currently developing a lab building in Kendall Square, 585 Kendall. This is a building we are partnering with Takeda. Takeda will be our primary tenant. And from the very beginning, we've partnered with the city of Cambridge to meet and exceed Cambridge's sustainability goals. We've partnered with Takeda. They have a very sophisticated in-house sustainability team. They have very aggressive sustainability goals themselves. So as a result of that partnership and collaboration, we're able to produce a result, a building that I think is a really great example of what innovation can do in this market.
That's great. So that's a project that was already underway, and I heard you reference a couple times that that market pull is still there, that your clientele is still looking for high-performance, sustainable buildings. So do you see that falling off? Do you see companies continue to kind of ask for those types of spaces?
We really do, and a lot of pharmaceutical companies are not just based in the U.S., right? So we've got the global influence. I think the big pharma companies are very interested in sustainability, but we also have to be flexible and adaptable to the startups who may be interested in sustainability but don't have a sophisticated in-house team like Takeda, or who are very sensitive to operating costs, and we need to work with them. So it's really meeting your clients and your tenants where they are and helping them achieve their goals. But by and large, scientists are interested in sustainability because they want beautiful buildings that encourage innovation.
Wonderful, thank you. And Steele, you had some good thoughts on this too, I think, in our prep calls. Is there anything you want to jump in quickly or not?
Yeah, so we see, I'll give you a little background as far as what our group does, but our group advises primarily companies who require complex environments on real estate strategy, project management development, and capital solutions. So we see companies who are going into beautiful buildings that BMR builds, and we do a lot of work in advanced manufacturing as well. And I think the interesting thing generally in the space, and with kind of conflict comes opportunities, we're seeing a lot of new technologies coming out where they could kind of serve as almost kind of behind the meter solutions, right, which are really unique. So I think it's not just, the sustainability piece to it, but it's also the reliability component of it at the grid level, right? And if you think about today's advanced manufacturing stock, for example, for many of these businesses that are going from R&D to pilot to eventually commercial stage manufacturing, the existing stock in this country is not necessarily adequate, right, to necessitate a successful operation for a lot of these businesses. And the power requirements, the loads requirements keep going up consistently. Some buildings are built in spec and they can cater to a lot of similar businesses, right? Think of discovery phase life sciences, for example, right? Many times those companies can show up and they can reuse a lot of the infrastructure that might go into all these buildings. But I think one of the biggest challenges we're seeing right now is just the ability to rely on power, right? And really kind of meet the demands that a lot of these companies are looking to solve for. So, we've seen anywhere from fusion to biofuels to nat gas, a lot of new businesses that are trying to innovate to try to make up for demands or meet demands, which gets me really excited.
Thanks. So just sticking to this theme of the rapidly altered federal landscape, there's a lot of talk about language, right? So DEI is under fire, climate terminology is under fire. And to be fair, I think many of us working in this space, particularly building decarbonization, have talked, frankly, for a very long time about the need to change language and talk more about building occupant comfort and savings, and that we should be talking about reducing energy costs rather than emissions, or at least focusing on that. So in order to reach building owners, large and small in both the residential and commercial sectors, does this political moment provide an opportunity for us, those of us plying these waters, working in the sector, to maybe begin talking about this work in newer terms that don't compromise our principles, but perhaps create a bigger tent, draw more people in? I think, Jane, you had some pretty strong feelings about this, so I'd love to hear from you first.
I was shaking my head ferociously as you were saying everything as a lead up. Yes, I would love to take this one. I will also start with a little bit of intro. So my company, Stepwise, we focus on the residential sector, where we allow homes to electrify faster, more affordably by tackling the infrastructure panel, like the electric panel problem, while then also allowing these homes to participate on the grid by adding flexibility. Now, where I feel very strongly about this topic is I think this is actually a really great moment for us to reframe solutions in the climate context outside of just, we are doing well for the planet, but also bringing in the lens of economic prosperity, resilience, and some of these common pain points that individuals, whether consumers, utilities, installers, actually care about and face on a day-to-day. So, as an example, the way that we go to market today is, as I mentioned, focusing on an infrastructure constraint problem around the panel. The way this plays out is if you want to get an EV charger or a heat pump or any number of appliances, as Steele mentioned earlier, a lot of times your infrastructure isn't quite there. And so our solution actually opens up the flexibility by giving your existing electric panel a boost so that you can add in these appliances without having to spend $5,000 on a panel upgrade. And the reason I bring that example up is it's a really beautiful anecdote for how we can frame something that's positive for the planet at large. Let's reduce friction to getting EVs and heat pumps, but also framing it in the context of we can actually help people save money, save headache, reduce kind of barriers to adoption. And I think that there's an opportunity for more solutions to find a way of doing well and doing good, if you will. And I think that it means going back to business fundamentals and doing things that actually solve a problem today. So I think that it's actually a really big opportunity to depoliticize the way we talk about climate solutions.
Do you want to jump in on that, Joanne, or anyone else want to comment on that?
Sure, yeah, I'll jump in. I totally agree with the concept of depoliticizing. I think, at the end of the day, most of our tenants want to reduce their energy costs. And so energy efficiency is just good business. I also think, though, it gives us...
Could you repeat that?
Energy efficiency is good business. But I also think it's an opportunity to kind of step back and look at sustainability a little more holistically and not just focus on reducing carbon emissions, which, that's important. That's an important piece of sustainability. But there's a lot more to the picture. There's what is your actual impact on the local community that you're in. At Biomed, we look at our tenants who are, life sciences tenants like Takeda. They're doing research that benefits the planet fundamentally. We through our developments, a lot of times we're developing buildings in urban areas that involve an environmental cleanup. So when you really look holistically at the impact that your building is having on the environment, that's sustainability, and should not be political.
Right, or as we approach, hopefully, regenerative design, right? That's the North Star. Jit Key.
Yeah, Galen, maybe I'll add my 2 cents, and this is really inspired by the conversation I've heard around me on this topic. I view it as technological advancement, right? A lot of fossil fuels burning, a lot of the old way we used to make, cement, for example, that's that's technology that's been around for a long time, and isn't it time for us to evolve our technology? And then the other question I have for the audience and anybody else who might be listening is like, when Elon built Tesla, did he use decarbonization? Or was he talking about it from a perspective of there were other benefits to electric vehicles, like faster acceleration time, sort of conservation of energy and all that. It was just an advancement in the technology, an alternative to sort of fossil fuel kind of gasoline cars, right? So I do wonder, as this paradigm shift is before us now, why don't we just shift that frame to say, technology evolves, and so we should evolve with it, and one of the benefits is better living spaces, cheaper, makes good business sense. And by the way, it'll be good for the environment too.
No, that's really helpful. I think these are some good observations. Steele, you want to jump in? You want to talk about passive survivability or something like that?
Well, exactly. I'll bring these, yeah. So it was funny, we were talking about just different terminologies to use for it. I mean, I would say, like, we talked a lot about energy independence, right, and supply chain resiliency. And if you think about like this whole, I think there's bipartisan support to bring a lot of these jobs back to America, bring production back to America, which we try to kind of center ourselves around that mission. And if you do think about the whole concept of reshoring, I mean, it's for companies who do worry about the climate, right, and ESG standards. It's one of the best things you could do because you are actually pulling. If you think about the manufacturing that's done overseas in China, for example, there's not a ton of policy in place related to emissions and the way people work. And we think it's a unique point in time where all of this automation that's being built here locally, if we worry about jobs such as, also the labor to actually do the jobs in the production, we think it's kind of a unique point in time where the automation's rising and ability to kind of supplement that with some of the reshoring activity going on. So we think that reshoring certainly is a good component to it in supply chain resiliency.
Well, Jitki, let's pivot to you now, and I'm not surprised that you leaned into innovation, right? So that's where I'm going to go with this question. So we've got an incredible pipeline of innovation across the board, across the entire industry here in Massachusetts, and I think there's fairly wide recognition that we've done a generally good job of supporting early stage climate tech innovators. I'm proud that Mass CC has played a critical role in that regard over the last decade or so. And I think there's also broad recognition that, of course, as product becomes commercially viable, begins to gain traction, that venture is happy to step in and support those companies. But there's that critical gap in between, the scaling gap, and we've had some resources for that, demonstration project funding, but particularly in light of the new federal landscape, and again, unfortunately, we already are seeing those grants being pulled back, rescinded. And even acknowledging the new resources that we have under the Mass Leads Act with the leadership of the Healy administration, we still need to think about new creative approaches to project financing. So I'm wondering if you could just comment on how you see the capital stack changing in this environment and what additional steps the Commonwealth organizations like ours should play in this new fiscal environment.
Yeah, great question, Galen. And certainly at Suffolk Technologies, which is a venture capital fund that I started and run today, closely affiliated with Suffolk Construction, that is on our minds every time we see a sort of climate-focused technology come up for investment, right? Look, I do think you're absolutely right. I think if we look back over the last 5 to 10 years, I would say, there has been a ton of support for early stage climate tech. I think there has also been lots of growth funds that are quite happy once everything's been de-risked. Like you just need capital to scale the solution. That's it. Great, we'll kind of put the capital in, get out 2 to 3x near sure thing type of thing, and then exit the company. But a combination of there being actually not a whole lot of exits, because market uncertainty is really bad for IPOs, and it's really bad for exits in general, and even M&A, really, it's been depressed. You're not seeing sort of the exits on the one side and the recycling of capital back in to fund their next wave of startups. At the same time, I think the early stage, the crop of sort of earlier stage climate tech startups are starting to realize that even after you have de-risked product, even after you've kind of done your proof of principle, your prototype is there, the capital needs, particularly of the ones that are more kind of hardware-based, are just quite high, and you haven't de-risked go-to-market. And for a lot of these companies, go-to-market is not trivial. So certainly in the built environment, right? You know, you need the real estate owners to sort of lean in, but you have the industry facing a myriad of challenges, including construction costs rising something like 37% from the start of COVID till now. So that is a big increase in the bill, and oftentimes your rents or whatever revenue that you're expecting from this real estate is not going to be as fast as that cost increase. So all of a sudden, you're building this in pencil. We have labor shortages across the board, 500,000 and up, depending on the source that you read. And so there is already challenges with the productivity and the ability for people to put work in place. You have an aging workforce, so a lot of expertise is starting to retire and leaving a little bit of a gap. So when you stack all of these existing challenges now, and then you sort of put a sustainability lens on it, I think the challenge becomes, okay, if we want to make some of these new technologies, if we want to bring it to market, re-engineer processes in some cases, right? Feed in all the sort of implications upstream in design so that you can take the appropriate trade-offs when you design your building to make sure it's the most sustainable. All of that requires effort, requires expertise, requires people to put in the time. And quite a lot of it requires a green premium, which, you know, when you look at it in the context of a 37% increase in cost, all of a sudden is a little bit difficult to stomach. So I think the early stage startups are recognizing that there is a little bit of a funding gap between having done your proof of concept, but your go-to-market's a lot longer, and your growth investors aren't quite ready to lean forward to take that risk. And so how to solve that? I've seen a couple of creative ways. One is be very open and creative in structuring partnerships with corporates. The good news is corporate investment in innovation is on the up. So when you look at the VC landscape, CVCs or basically capital that comes from large corporates, engaging with the open innovations ecosystem and not necessarily just in your own internal R&D, has been increasing actually as a share of venture capital out there. Obviously, a lot of these corporates do need to have a strategic benefit back to themselves, but lots of them now have more sophisticated mechanisms for coupling to the open ecosystem to drive innovation, right? So structuring creative partnerships with them, because they often have a lot more sort of, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's logistics, whether it's market insight, distribution channels, what have you. There's a lot more that they can bring to the table so that you as a startup don't have to develop all of these capabilities in addition to developing the technology, right? So that's kind of one method that I've seen. I think other more traditional capital formation, stack formation methods should also be explored. A lot of project financing, right? And how do you bring forward or secure demand upfront to get that project financing? Asset-backed loans, definitely go down that path if you have assets to take a loan against. Debt used well in combination with equity, I think people also have to look at. And so this kind of maybe naive era where you're going to raise equity funding to fund everything, I think that's behind us.
So you mentioned risk came up a couple times, of course. It always does with early stage tech, and there's, of course, there are several different flavors of risk, right? There's technology risk, there's credit risk. So do you see novel insurance products, and any of you kind of jump in, kind of playing a complementary role alongside project finance to kind of address?
Great question. I can't say I have, but I'd be curious to hear if my fellow panelists have.
Well, I think you made some incredible comments, and it's a lot of things that we see with many of the companies we work with. Ironically, just given the world that we're in, many times the companies are raising capital in lieu of us, effectuating a site selection process, right? So they go hand in hand. I do think the realities of raising pure equities for your company until you get to commercial stage is a thing of the past. Certainly that's not going to happen for a long time. But I do think the awareness around the different vehicles you can pull on and the different strategies you can implement earlier and earlier and earlier in stage is really interesting, right? So, we try to look at these projects as, okay, because you have your total like CapEx requirements, and let's break that down to equipment, infrastructure, building, and there's a way to capitalize that stack in a kind of in a creative way that balances equity plus debt. We actually started we co-founded with a couple of venture partners a collaboration called Venex, which basically brings together 6 different VC funds, all deep technology focused, early stage, with the thought that we could help syndicate capital, also provide resources and kind of a place for people to go when they needed help, right? And I think what we recognize is that the world that we're all operating and working in, it needs more awareness and needs more capital. And I think with more awareness, more capital will come more support from a policy perspective, more opportunities for the state to lean in, pair pursue with a lot of the work that Mass CEC is doing, which is really helpful. And I think a clear path for a lot of these, folks who end up being innovators, right, to kind of say, okay, I have the support at multiple levels to go do this, and I don't have to go out and suddenly close on a round and then subsequently 3 months later start raising again just to make sure I can extend my run by 6 months, right? These are really complicated projects to get off the ground. I know there's a panel before this around, first of a kind facilities, which is even more complicated. But I think, bringing in, these partners and getting even the partners on the financing side better access to these companies is very relevant as well, so they understand what the opportunities are. We have seen folks as well on the capital side have certain interests in specific industries, right? You look at sector coupling, whether it's semiconductor, additive, or specific types of energy. There are groups who have certain interests, and part of that's just based on their knowledge base, right? I think everyone's looking for demand trends, right? But I think now you're getting these clusters of innovation that you can kind of say, okay, all these businesses need this similar type of infrastructure to necessitate a successful pilot or commercial scale operation and get to these production milestones. So, I think a lot of it comes back to awareness. I don't know if I answered your question, by the way.
No, but you added some wonderful content, so appreciate that. So why don't we pivot to actually one of my favorite topics, load flexibility. I think that this morning the governor said that siting and permitting is not very sexy, but it's nonetheless very important. Well, I think load flexibility is very sexy, actually. So why don't we turn to buildings as grid assets? And I think as much as the rapid growth of energy demand associated with data centers is somewhat alarming, I do think it has helped shed some light on the need for greater load flexibility. And again, a topic that those of us who care about and think on a daily basis about the grid and grid operations have thought about for a long time, but I think it's finally having its day. So Jane, your company, Stepwise, let's go back to you on this, works in this space at the residential level, particularly with a focus on EV charging. So I'd love to hear just your thoughts about buildings as grid assets.
Yeah, this is also one of my favorite questions, so thank you. You mentioned earlier the stat that 36% of greenhouse gas emissions come from the building sector, correct, in the Commonwealth. And I believe from an energy demand perspective, residential is about half of that from what I've seen nationally. And so homes, from my perspective, is this kind of untapped market because it's so fragmented, homeowners are so fickle. Like, how do you actually control homes and make them these flexible grid assets that we talk about? And what gets me excited about this space is that we're starting to see an influx of innovation targeting smart homes, digitization. You guys might have heard about, like smart appliances that are battery backed. They're smart panels, smart breakers, smart meters. Like, they're smart, a lot of different things. And I think Nest did a really good job of really starting that trend. And I think the opportunity and the challenge here is, goes back to fragmentation. Ultimately, most people have dumb devices in their homes that are just not connected. And so how do we get people to replace these appliances so that they can actually connect and communicate back with the grid? And I think that's such an interesting problem, and that's something that my company is working on. And where I also see the opportunity actually comes back to my previous point around doing well and doing good, or capturing economic value. Again, one of the reasons why we see fragmentation is that there's so many options for people, and everyone has different preferences. And so the best way, in my opinion, to really break through that and have everybody see a solution as being superior is, if you save money, it saves you headache, it just makes sense. And so the way we think about this problem is, going back to the panel constraint problem, about 50% of residential housing stock will have some sort of panel problem if you're going to upgrade and add new appliances. And so great, maybe we use that as a common denominator to get people to adopt solutions that can then, in the future, allow them to participate back into the grid. I think the tricky thread here is, because we're simultaneously building for the today and the future, we almost have to solve the problem and bring that very clear, crisp value proposition today, while setting up the market, the energy market, for flexibility with regards to residential. We're like setting it up to be in existence in the future. And for many people who are familiar with the space, we've been talking about virtual power plants and the energy market and monetizing flexibility for so long, but it's been hard to see it because it's a chicken or the egg problem. If you don't have the individual assets you can control, you can't fully quantify the benefits, but you also can't quantify the benefits if you don't start. And so, we're trying to thread the needle by tackling the today and the future at the same time.
Thanks, Jane. Why don't we pivot to just, I think, our last big question here before we move to some final observations and takeaways. Workforce. So the decarbonizing our buildings, particularly our existing building stock, it represents an enormous amount of work, right? From the smallest single family to the largest office tower and everything in between, commercial, residential, industrial. And yet at the same time, I know I've got a bunch of boys. None of them are really interested in working in the trades. They're like me. They're kind of weekend warrior carpenters. But we're seeing declining interest, right, among young people in the trades. So and as we're upgrading many of our existing buildings that are essentially Model Ts to high-performance sports cars with new systems. It's not just about building these buildings, but identifying the right individuals with the right skills and credentials to maintain them and operate them, particularly in the way in which they were designed. So if anyone would love to jump in on kind of the workforce challenge, what new models should we be considering? What are you seeing out there? How do we overcome this I hate to say aversion, but this challenge that we have in enticing young people in working in the trades, particularly focused on buildings?
I feel like I should take this one, yeah. So I think, not to sound like a hammer looking for a nail, technology is actually part of the answer, right? One of the industry in general probably is an unfair reputation amongst the younger generation in terms of it not being a particularly attractive industry to go into, it's like, things are done the same way they've been done for like decades. But actually, it is a tremendously rewarding industry from a skilled perspective. It's very entrepreneurial, actually. Lots of people can start companies, and earn a pretty comfortable living doing so. Think about how much you pay your plumber that you kind of, bring to your home whenever you have a problem. And increasingly, that is a rare skill set. So part of the answer is actually bringing new technology to how we do things so that you strip away a lot of the highly manual, non-rewarding aspects of the work, the same way that a lot of other industries have digitized, has modernized, and introduced technology. We need to do that for the built environment. That in of itself will be a draw. I mean, just to give a little bit of an anecdote, I think one of the companies that we had invested in a while ago actually does layout on floor. So when you build a building, right, you got to draw where things go. A lot of that layout was done by chalk and line. You snap a line, you draw a piece of chalk, and that's kind of where things go. Time-consuming, manual, not a lot of people want to do that. And so now there are robots that you can load a drawing in, and it just prints. So and then there are lots of people who want to operate that robot, right? Like, it's kind of cool. So that changes a little bit the job. And I think the more that we can bring elements like this to the job, it will increase the attractiveness of the job. Now, that's not to say or to diminish the importance of getting the word out there, of encouraging folks, of setting up, sort of training programs and skill building programs, maybe bringing back some of the vocational schools that we have lost, right, over the last 2 decades. All of that's necessary, but I do think technology is an important part of the equation.
There we go. All right. I'll keep it basic. I mean, I think the 2 biggest things are education and inspiration. I think there's been kind of like, when it comes to vocational schools, right, it's been kind of like, oh, you're not going to quote unquote college, right? And I grew up in the trades. My father was a contractor. I pay a plumber now to do stuff, and I pay him a lot of money, right? And I have 5 kids, and I try to put my kids to work as much as I can. But that's just the stuff that I had to do myself against what they do today is a lot different. And I think there's an opportunity to really get people excited about going in some of these industries. I think you see a big push again towards like mechanical, electrical engineering, which I think is really positive, and I think that's going to be a really big requirement. And part of it hinges upon just the success of a lot of these companies, especially local companies too, like Commonwealth Fusion Systems, for example. Like, you're going in and people are inspired by a lot of these businesses. These are like world-changing businesses, which is pretty cool. So yeah, we see just an opportunity, I think, to kind of inspire a lot of young kind of kids who are growing up and say, what do I want to do? Well, there's optionalities. You don't necessarily have to go to college, and sometimes it seems like the land of make-believe and hang out for 4 years and get a degree. But I think there's a big opportunity to do that. And then I think the other piece of it is like, what does that kind of connectivity look like at the corporate level? I know Suffolk does a great job of obviously hiring out trades, right, which is really important. Is there better connectivity we can provide kind of at the the education level with a lot of the larger contractors, folks who eventually get hired? I think there's probably some more work to do there, which probably could lead to an opportunity for someone out here in the crowd.
Just going to add a really quick point, which is, I don't think this is even a secret anymore, but I really do think the next generation of millionaires are electrical contractors, HVAC installers. They are the tradespeople. And so there is a lot of money to be made if you can be a great craftsperson in the trades and know how to run a business. So, I think it speaks for itself. And the second point is, I really agree with your point about digitization, innovation in the trades. My co-founder is an electrician, and so I do spend a lot of time with the electrical trades folks. And the thing is, a lot of them get very excited by new technologies, especially in climate. They do actually get excited about doing well and doing good. They especially love it when there are tools that they feel make them smart to their customers, right? If they can do good work and it saves them time, allows them to make more profits, and they now appear better to their, smarter to their customers, then it's kind of a win-win-win. So I think it's, trying to figure out how can we actually create solutions and digital tools for the tradespeople to do even better work that simultaneously solves their problems.
Thank you. Joanna?
Just quickly, I don't really have a solution to this. I do know that from the corporate perspective, the lack of skilled labor is definitely a cost that is increasing, particularly in construction. And so I think whatever we can do to promote, organizations that are, training opportunities, et cetera. But just a quick anecdote. I have a son who, just graduated from college. He has a cousin the same age. The two of them grew up together, played Legos together, all of those things. My son is a mechanical engineer. His cousin is an electrician. And The two of them continue to have so much in common, but I see so many opportunities for his cousin, the electrician, while my son is like still struggling to get a job. So just sort of, anecdotally, I think there was a lot of opportunity out there for, smart kids who want to apply themselves.
Yeah, and no, that's a great data point. No shortage of work for electricians, that's for sure. Okay, great. Well, we have a few minutes left. Actually, quickly, just a little bit of a self-promotion here. Mass CEC, we actually, on this topic, we just released a series of really wonderful videos that I encourage you all to check out. They're up on YouTube, and they feature, I think, mostly young people talking about a wide variety of careers in the climate space, including the trades, again, across a variety of sectors in a really inspirational way, and about the kind of the training necessary and so on. So I'd encourage you all to check that out. So with under 4 minutes remaining now, let's just do a rapid fire round here. And Joanna, why don't we just start with you? If you could just leave us with a key takeaway or a bold prediction about how you see this space, building decarbonization, evolving over the next 1 to 2 years.
Sure. Well, I think sustainability has to be tackled locally. I think the combination between what's happening at local government, local building owners, tenants, et cetera, I think the collaboration and partnership with industry, all of us working together towards the same goal is what is going to really make those advances over the next 2 to 3 years that need to be made in order for us to tackle this really challenging issue. So I think collaboration and partnership is my key takeaway.
Great, thanks, Joanna. Yeah, we've heard that a lot today. I think that's an important theme. Jitki?
Yeah, my prediction, maybe a little bit further out than 1 or 2 years, Galen, is that sustainability will come roaring back. That is a long-term trend. It's not going to change. We have to get there. But I do think you have to tighten belts for the near term, right? So be creative. Don't make things expensive. You got, like I said, tighten belts. Make sure that it works commercially. Be creative with how you grant equity, how you bring in partners, do design partnerships, do warrant agreements. Figure your way to the go-to-market with as little reliance on federal funding or just non-commercial funding in general, right? And then it'll come roaring back, and you'll have built a great product and a great business when the trend takes off again.
I think my parting words would be for other founders out there, early stage. This is going to be an era of just building very disciplined, business sound companies. And I think that everyone else who's building in this sector, will just be that much stronger coming out of this time, where we have the discipline to really think about what is the actual minimum viable product we can launch, and how do we think about the economics and communicating that super clearly to our end customers.
You guys all stole my lines. Benefit of going last. I guess I would say, outside of everything else everyone else said, I think one of the biggest focuses needs to be probably grid modernization is probably one of the biggest areas of focus for the next 2 years. And I think there's some really cool new technologies that are coming out between HTS and distribution. And then, I think that's one of the biggest concerns I think everyone has.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, I also wanted to thank you too, Jitki, for opening up your wonderful space at Suffolk in South Boston for events that you've hosted for our industry over the last couple of years. It's a really beautiful space, so just wanted to acknowledge that. But wanted to thank you all for these insights, and please join me in thanking our panel.